How do you feel trauma can negatively or positively impact someone's life?
I mean, there's so many ways it could affect negatively. So for me, my father molested me from when I was 8 years old, and then he started raping me when I was 10 years old. And through that sexual abuse, there was also physical and emotional abuse. So I grew up experience being in a constant state of trauma. Now, it's kind of difficult for me to compare someone who has had a few traumatic experiences. Let's say someone who was traumatized as a child, maybe one or two incidents, compared to me who experienced that trauma over and over again for years. But it honestly, it kind of manifests as the same in a negative way, because then when you go into normal life situations, your whole perspective can be skewed. Like for me, I didn't escape my father until I was 24 years old. So I lived with being traumatized repeatedly for a long period of my life. And it made me untrusting and afraid of people in general once I finally did escape them. I then had this perspective that everyone was looking at me as some form of, objectified sexual person that they would only use for their deviant desires, because that's all I knew from my father from a young age. As far as the positive sides, I think that well, every person is different, right? Like you said, every person is different. And I think people have different ways that they could cope, manage, and heal from trauma. And I did study psychology in college, and there is this type of resilience that some people just innately have that's not been studied well enough to know where does it come from, but it's actually been called magic, because most people, if you pile on enough trauma and struggle on them, they'll eventually break down under the pressure. But there are some people that can actually grow from that trauma and become more resilient and more strong. And it's not really been discovered why that is the case. It just happens sometimes. And fortunate for myself, I was able to manage my trauma, cope with it, and then heal from it. But there are many people that cannot. They experience anything close to what I've experienced, and they want to commit suicide. They try to manage the pain through drugs and opioids and just negative behavior, trying to drown out what they experienced.